welcome to our midweek series titled Money, Marriage, and the Madness of Raising Humans. We are in a global pandemic right now, and we know that there are some really high stress points. There are a lot of things that are causing a ton of tension and stress within our daily lives. Now, these things were causing tension and stress before the global pandemic, but we know that the pandemic has just heightened these. And so we want to be focusing on money. We did that 3 weeks, the previous 3 weeks. Today we're beginning a series on marriage, and then we're going to spend a few weeks on the madness of raising humans, which is, of course, parenting. So I'm glad that you joined us today for this conversation on marriage. I'm by no means an expert on marriage. I have been married 15 years, 16 years, and Emily and I have continued to love each other, and we are committed to each other. But it hasn't always been easy. We've had our challenges, we've had our struggles, we've had our rough points. But we do know that there are some principles that are going to not only help us last in marriage, but succeed and thrive in marriage. We have learned these as individuals, and I'm hoping that we can share them with you over the next couple weeks as well. Now, most people don't know what their stress points are. Most people don't know what their tension points are. They don't know what their triggers are, and so they don't even know how to deal with them when they come up. And so one of the first things I would encourage you to start thinking about is, what are those times that I just get angry? What are those times in my relationship with my spouse that I just kind of fly off the handle? What are those times that I feel resentment? What are those times when I feel like I'm pushing all my emotions down? What are those times of tension and of stress? And then, after thinking through that, I want you to ask yourself, am I committed to this relationship? Are we committed to this relationship? Are you committed to each other? Because I believe that any couple that is honestly committed to each other can weather any storm and come out actually better on the other end. But you must realize that being committed to each other isn't just about enduring. It's not just about getting through and sucking it up and, okay, we're going to do this, but it's about humility and hard work and dealing with personal stuff and taking ownership of my part in this. It's about communication. It's about love. I want to help you understand exactly what that means in our time together today. So, think, what are those areas that set you off? In your relationship with your spouse, what are those areas that set you off? What experiences set you off? What is it about him that makes you so angry? What is it about what she did again that makes you so resentful? And then how do you bring it up? How do you fight about it? How do you argue about it? How do you then resolve it? Because here's the thing, you have options. I mean, you can stuff your feelings. You can never bring up your tensions or your stress points, and you can shove them down. But you need to know that when you do this, that your feelings will leak through your behavior. And that's not a genuine relationship. You'll be standoffish when you're not arguing. You'll be afraid to engage anytime. You'll be distant. You'll be afraid. You'll be walking on eggshells. And a lot of marriages experience infidelity, actually, studies show, because one of the couples stuffed their feelings, and they weren't honest, and they didn't fight, and they didn't resolve the issues, and so year after years they felt beat up upon, and never getting their way, they found somebody else who would validate them. Now there's another option, though, that is you could explode in rage, but you need to know that your behavior will define your feelings. Maybe not from your perspective, but from your spouse's. Your spouse will interpret your heart by your words and your actions. And this is why being in a relationship is so hard. And this is in part why being in a relationship takes constant work. Two very different people coming in to become one will always be a messy process. Two people becoming one will always be a very messy process. And I don't care how wonderful your marriage is, there are times when it is going to be messy. And it's still always going to take a lot of work. And the way you speak and respond and deal with the challenge is partly always your personality, but it's also partly always your upbringing. You see, you watched your parents deal with stuff. When you were a kid, you watched your parents deal with this. You learned how to deal with tension and from stress from your parents and from other people who spoke into your life and from other people who modeled it and from TV shows you watched and television and movies you watched and how you saw the world interacting in your neighbor's marriage. I mean, we are formed by any number of factors. Partly our personality, absolutely, the way that we are hardwired, but partly by the factors outside and how we experience other people teaching us what it means to be in relationship. I remember when I was a kid listening several times. I would sit on the stairs and I would listen to my parents fight in the kitchen. And they yelled. And they defended. And they accused. And they blame shifted. And back and forth, on it went until one of them just had enough and walked away. And that's all I heard, right? I heard the heat of the moment, the passion of the fight, the passion of the argument is all I heard as little ears listening in to how my parents fight. I never saw them how once they calmed down, they came back together and resolved the issue. So I determined, right, having heard my parents fight this way, being the peacekeeper that I wasn't going to be a fighter because it sounded horrible to my little ears, and I wondered, what is this accomplishing? What good is being done by you two just arguing and fighting? So even now, when Emily and I have arguments, I don't fight. I'm not the fighter. But believe me, I listen to Emily fight. She gets passionate about things, and I listen there, and I soak it in, and I try to respond with civility, but to her interpretation, and oftentimes it can be true as well, I am actually just stuffing the issues. I'm quiet, and deep inside, I'm annoyed, and I'm upset, but in these moments, I think, why wake the beast? You know, why get upset in these moments? She's going to unleash on me. She's going to yell. And I remember then, in those times, my parents yelling and how much I disliked it and how much I hated it and how much I never wanted that to be part of my relationship. And so, as a little boy listening to my parents, and come on, I don't want my kids to hear that. And I don't want Emily to poke at my insecurities. That maybe I'm wrong in this situation, and so I keep quiet, and for a lot of reasons, I might just stuff it. And it drives her crazy, but you need to know that there are two personalities coming into a relationship. There are two sets of upbringings coming into a relationship. We learn from childhood and from our hardwiring how we are going to handle conflict in relationship. We learn from personal experience, and we take this knowledge and all of these experiences with us into marriage, and this makes marriage very, very hard, but it makes marriage a lot of work. And if you're not willing to do the work, my friends, you're never going to be successful then in marriage. 11 years ago this summer, the 35W bridge over the Mississippi River in Minneapolis collapsed. Maybe some of you recall seeing this on the news. We were actually out here vacationing. We lived in Minnesota out here vacationing at the ocean when it collapsed. So we weren't around personally when it happened, but we remember going back to it. Now, the reason the bridge collapsed was because there were fractures in the gusset plates connecting the beams. And the weight of the vehicles put tension and stress on those plates, eventually causing them to fail and to collapse. And my friends, I want you to see this as an image of marriage. We come into marriage with fractures. Everybody does, right? We all come in with our personal experiences, with our hardwirings, and with our upbringings. We come into marriage with our limitations and our inconsistencies and our habits and our traits. We are sinful people coming into marriage. And the weight of the marriage, the context of marriage itself is like those cars and those trucks driving over those bridges, revealing the fractures in the gusset plate. Marriage just does this. It is a context that is going to reveal your inconsistencies. It's going to reveal your brokenness. It's going to reveal your fractures. It is going to reveal your sin. See, maybe you never had the discipline with spending money, and now marriage, right? You're put in this position where you have to budget and care about your spending the money because you have a household to support and bills to pay, and you've come into this relationship and you have two very different views on money. Or maybe you've never learned to do laundry because, well, I don't know, your mom always did it for you, and now you just have this expectation that it's going to be done for you, and now you have two different opinions and upbringings and personalities and experiences about taking care of the house. Maybe you just didn't pick up after yourself, but your spouse is very concerned with cleanliness, and now you have to deal with this in marriage, right? Marriage just creates these contexts because we are two people coming into this context together. Maybe you never had a job, and now in adulthood you have to go to work, and there's time management, and there's money management, and there's work ethics, and it demands you, and all the demands on you seem taxing to you, and they seem overwhelming, but now you have to provide for your family. Two very different experiences and upbringings and personalities, people coming in, make marriage exceptionally challenging. Maybe you were sexually active before marriage, but your spouse wasn't, and now you have two very different expectations of what sex is and what it means and how it should be done. Very challenging to navigate. Maybe you think it's the man's job to take out the trash because, well, that's what your dad did in your household, and your mom was the one who cleaned the toilets in your household and cleaned the bathroom in your household and did the dishes. Your dad did all the outside work. This is how it was in my house. My dad did all the outside work. My mom did all the inside work. And then you come into a marriage and your spouse is like, well, you know what, I grew up under the single mother, and she was the one who did everything. She took out the trash, she mowed the lawn, she did the dishes, she washed the laundry, she cleaned the bathrooms, and now you're thinking, well, that's all the women's work. See how challenging this is? See how challenging marriage is? See how the context of marriages creates this very, very challenging arena for us to live life in. It takes work, my friends, constant work, and if you're not committed to the work, if you're not committed more to the other than you are for yourself, then your marriage will not succeed. It will not thrive. We all bring past experiences and personalities and assumptions and expectations into marriage. And what is so often the case is that two broken people bring two broken lives into marriage, thinking that they will then make a whole. We see this in stupid quotes and stupid ideas like, you complete me, or she's my better half. This is a terrible mentality to take into marriage because all you are doing is bringing two broken lives together, hoping marriage will fix it. When we've seen that marriage is just going to reveal actually how broken you are. Marriage is not a fix to your broken self. It'll only make it harder. Whenever I do marriage counseling or premarital counseling for that matter, I first always address the individual. Not the couple, the individuals. Because if you do not have two whole people, two redeemed people, two forgiven people made right with God people coming into marriage, it'll never be successful. And I don't mean that it won't last. Like, it might last until the day you die. A lot of marriages last until the day they die, but they aren't successful. They didn't do what marriage was intended to do. They didn't thrive in marriage. See, marriage is not one half and one half making one whole. It's one whole plus one whole equaling one whole. It's weird, it's paradoxical, it doesn't entirely make sense. But my friends, this must be the mentality that you take. Two whole people coming into a relationship will make one, not two halves, hoping that the other person will fulfill them. And so the first thing you need to do if your marriage is hurting, if you're struggling, and really, if you're healthy and you're thriving, you should do this as well. You need to deal with your family of origin issues. You need to deal with all the stuff that you brought into this marriage, your expectations, your upbringing, your personality, everything that came before your marriage. You need to deal with all of that. You need to work on who you are and why you are the way you are. Dig into your own heart, look at the plank in your own eye, repent of your own sins, deal with your stuff, because, my friends, doing this will not only be a gift to yourself, but doing this is also an incredible gift to your spouse. You might need to find a therapist to help you with it, to work through your stuff before you work through yours and your spouse's stuff together. Therapy, my friends, is a very, very valuable experience, and I would encourage every single couple to go through marriage counseling. Whether you feel like your marriage is great, whether you feel like it's really struggling, every couple could use the benefit of a trained professional speaking into their marriage. But here's one recommendation to fight well. If you feel like you need to throw something, if you feel like you need to yell and scream and fight, whether that's something that you are throwing is verbal or it is physical, my first encouragement to you is to throw it at God. Before you throw it at your spouse, throw it at God. Fight with God about what's irritating you before you fight with your spouse. 1 Peter tells us to throw or to cast all our anxiety, our worry, our fear, our irritations on God because He cares for us and He is capable of carrying us. Pray and wrestle and fight with God before you wrestle and fight with your spouse. You'll be amazed at how this will change your demeanor. You'll be amazed at how this will change your disposition about what's bothering you. And at the very least, you're going to be reminded, I hope, that you're not perfect either. That you're inconsistent in your character too. That you have baggage and you have personality that can sometimes be difficult too. That, my friends, you too are a sinner. And yet, you've been met with patience, and you've been met with grace, and you've been met with kindness. This will hopefully allow you, and it will also then hopefully empower you as you submit to God to meet your spouse with patience and grace and kindness as well. Okay, so I began by asking you, if you are in this together, are you committed to each other? See, I hope every marriage would say yes. But unfortunately, many may not, and if they're not bold enough to say no outright, their behavior and their disposition to their spouse says that they aren't. But the answer should be obvious because we've technically already provided an answer. We've already answered this question. We've already made the choice. Who of you are watching, assuming that you are married, can remember your vows? You know, you came together on this wedding day, beautiful day that you probably remember very vividly. How many of you can remember actually what you promised to your spouse? I have been to, I cannot even count how many weddings I've attended, but I've officiated over 25 weddings, and every single marriage ceremony has vows. I mean, vows are actually the whole point of the marriage ceremony. That's why we have marriage ceremonies, is so that two people can come together and promise and make commitments to each other. And the reason that you invite all these people is so that they are witnesses to the promises you are making, and that they then can hold you accountable to the promises that you are making. But how many people, 10 years, 16 years in my case later, can remember actually what they said? Here are the actual vows and promises I made to Emily. And by the way, I couldn't tell you this outright. I had to go look this up. Here are the vows that I made to Emily. I was asked, will you have Emily to be your wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy state of matrimony? Will you love her, comfort her, honor her, and keep her, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only for her, so long as you both shall live? I said, I will. Then I said, I, Ross, take thee, Emily, to be my wife. I do promise and covenant before God and these witnesses to be thy loving and faithful husband, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. You see, I promised on word and in front of over 300 people that I am committed no matter what sickness comes our way, no matter how poor we are, no matter what kind of job situations we find ourselves in, no matter what, anything in all of the world. This is unconditional, right? This is not based on conditions of how our life is going or how I feel on every given day. I am promising my life until the day that I die to put Emily first. To commit my life to be only for her. That only death would separate us and would end our commitment towards one another. I mean, wow. Think about that. Think about that. Do you realize what you said when you made your vows? Do you realize what you promised on your wedding day? When you promised your life to another person, do you realize what you did? Do you realize what you're witnessing when you attend a wedding? I mean, this is serious stuff. See, I promised this to Emily, and she did the same to me. And as I said, every single wedding that I've ever been to or officiated has done the same. So what's so blatantly true and so sad in our society is that, man, so many of us just aren't people of our word. Integrity and promises just don't mean anything because every wedding I've ever been to had similar things said. Very similar things promised. And yet half of all marriages end in divorce. And even those marriages that don't end aren't thriving. They aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing as a marriage. Now, I get that most divorce situations, it's really one person who is less committed than another. Oftentimes this is the case. Rarely, actually, are both parties willing and eager to separate and end a marriage. And this goes back to the need for two people to come together, for two people who are equally committed to fighting on behalf of the other, for the two people with a common commitment and a vision and a drive and a pace to come together. Paul said to the Corinthians that a marriage should be equally yoked. He said, before you enter into the marriage situation, you need to ask yourself, are you going to be equally yoked with the other person? And it's terminology that we don't use very often, but in his day, an yoke was a wooden beam that was placed over the neck of two oxen who were then going to go and plow a field. And the idea behind this whole thing is like, hey, if two oxen weren't of equal strength, if they weren't of equal speed, if they weren't of equal commitment to the task, if they didn't have the same vision and the same goals, then they would never effectively plow a field. You know, one would either drag the one behind because he's stronger and he's moving faster and he's more committed than the other, and the other one would just feel like he or she is being dragged through the process, or they would just go in circles. And neither way would a field be effectively plowed. And he is saying, guys, don't be unequally yoked in marriage. Know what you're getting yourself into. Know the commitment of the other person from the get-go. Know the pace by which they want to go, and the goals and the vision and the dreams that they have together. Know the strength by which they're willing to push. And ask yourself, are you willing to actually engage this? Some of you know exactly what he's talking about. Some of the reason that your previous marriage has failed is because you know exactly what Paul is talking about. You entered into a relationship and the other person wasn't as committed to you. That they had different visions for what marriage was or what life was going to be like than you did. And they pushed harder than you did, and they fought in a different way than you did, and they were more committed to themselves than they were of you, and they weren't equally yoked to you. You did not have a partner that was going to help you accomplish the goals together in life. Some of you know exactly what Paul is talking about. And so to conclude our time together, I want to help you with a simple analogy of how to prioritize marriage and where marriage needs to be within the priority of living your life as a whole. I've used this illustration several times, and I think it's helpful as we think of marriage and we think of marriage in life. I use this analogy of a fountain. A three-tiered fountain looks something like this, with a header, a fountainhead where water comes out of, a middle beam, and then the bottom. Some of you have seen a fountain like this before. Some of you have thrown coins in a fountain like this before. The water comes out the top to fill this middle one, which then overflows with water down to the bottom. That water then is pumped up to the top. But notice that the water is always going to come from the fountainhead. This is always going to be the source. The fountainhead is always going to be the source of the water, of the life of this person. And this person, this fountain, is a representation of you. This is a person we're talking about. It's an analogy on how life works. And notice then that if these are in any different order than this, they won't receive life. For instance, if you put the center tier up at the top, and then you had your middle one here, and then you had your bottom one here. The water would flow from here and fill here, maybe, perhaps, but this top layer would always remain dry. It would be dead. And so I need you to know, as a person who is striving to be whole, remember, 2 holes coming into a marriage make a marriage work. 2 holes coming into a marriage make a marriage work. That God is always going to be the giver of life. One individual person who is committed first and foremost to God, meeting up with another person who is first and foremost committed to God, coming together will make a marriage function well. Then he will give life to this second tier, which, my friends, is always your marriage. 2 people coming and committing themselves to God first and foremost will give life to your marriage. 2 whole people coming into marriage will make one person who is whole, thriving in marriage, committed to the other, willing to give and to bend and to serve the other person, because that is what the life of God will instill within you. A person who is committed to following God after all of their heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving God, will be a person who is a servant, will be a person who is committed to patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. It will be a person who is committed to grace and forgiveness and mercy and justice. And that is the kind of person that I want spilling all of that over onto me so that I can spill it all over onto them. We'll talk more about that next week. My friends, everything else then, all the rest of life, your phone usage, your children, your jobs, your money, your house, everything else in life must be at that bottom tier. As a person who is committed to God, the life of God will overflow onto your marriage. But notice that these aren't going to be abandoned. They're not neglected. They are not forgotten about. They receive the life of your marriage. If you want to do what's best for your children, my friends, make sure that your marriage is strong and secure. It will bless your children. It will bless your finances. It'll bless your household. It will make your job all that much better if you have a partner who is whole and is working for you and with you. My friends, put your children above your marriage. It's the same with this, right? God may be up here. He may be your priority. He may be where life is coming from, but you have put your children above your marriage. You've put your phone use above your marriage. You've put your electronics. You've put your job. You've put your pursuit of money above your marriage. And my friends, your marriage will dry up. I hope that it's helpful for you. I hope that you would recognize that you as an individual have a responsibility to bring all of the baggage that you have carried into marriage, to deal with your family of origin issues, your upbringing issues, your personality issues as an individual. Bring them to God, become whole with God. It will bless your marriage. If your partner does the same, you will have a thriving marriage. Next week, we're going to talk about a scriptural source for an understanding of what marriage is and how we can thrive in marriage. We're going to continue this conversation next week. A couple of questions, though, that I want to help you wrestle with, and maybe that will help you as you're eating dinner, or maybe before you go to bed tonight, a couple things for you just to converse about as an individual in the spirit of prayer as yourself, but also then perhaps with your spouse. Are we committed to each other? How is my personality? Second question. How has my personality and my upbringing dictated the way I fight and my expectations coming into marriage? Third question, why is it important to have 2 whole people coming into marriage? Is it true of us? Are we 2 whole individuals who have been made right with God? This is so important, my friends, if you're going to have a thriving marriage. Fourth, what are our goals and dreams? This is speaking to that equally yoked part. Are we moving at the same pace in marriage? Are we pulling with the same strength, with the same commitment? And lastly, where are our priorities? Where are my priorities? Is God number one and then is my spouse second? Or is a job or the pursuit of money or our children, my phone, whatever else it may be, the upkeep of my house? Are these taking precedence over my need to be a spouse committed to God, who then is committed to my partner? Hey, thank you for joining us today. I hope this has been helpful to you. I encourage you to join us next week as we delve into more scripture about what it means to be a person in relationship, specifically in the context of marriage. You do not want to miss it. It will be very, very helpful if you choose to put it into practice. Hope to see you then. God bless.